Nope.
The mysteries of sleep paralysis have captivated the world for centuries. This phenomenon has been widely known and investigated through both church and science. Individuals from all around the world claim to have been bestowed with seeing the shadow, a common name given to what many believe to be a demon. Science tells us that these sightings are brought on by nothing more than basic hallucinations. I'm here to tell you differently. Hallucinations are an experience involving the apparent perception of something not present. So, if one were to argue that this shadow isn't truly there, and that it is just in one's mind, another would counter with the question, why are different individuals visited by the same, quote, hallucination? My intentions are only research and theory. There is no need for me to bore you with my family's history in the paranormal, nor give reason to why I do the things I do. Solving cases, or attempting to, has been the hobby of our family and even friends who we've shared secrets with. But I digress. To the matter at hand. Sleep paralysis and the shadow. Our team had spent over 4 hours getting everything set up on the first floor. Monitoring and observation had been set up on the second floor, a loft which one could easily watch the first floor from above. My younger sister, who we'll just name Vivian, had a knack for perfection. She would check the setup over and over until she was confident in its ability to aid our experiment. Positions! Vivian clapped her hands. If anyone entered our building unintentionally, they'd assume we were shooting on set. 2 others and I lay in position. Vivian escorted the rest of the team to observation. My friend, let's say Marty, leaned over. Are you ready to meet it? I reminded him that the shadow was not known for every paralysis, and that it's documented to be random. Of course, he was usually the optimistic one of our group. Quiet! It's go time! Vivian ordered us from the speaker. The lights dimmed. We all straightened our backs against the sleeping bags we had laid in a circle. White noise, a static you might hear from an open radio frequency, took over the speaker. It started at a low volume before growing to the decibels set by our researcher. People's minds are different, so our patterns of falling asleep are also different. The reason we had multiple people for this experiment was not only for the probability, but also because we were curious of finding at least 2 individuals encountering the same experience, if we were to be so fortunate. Which, in this particular case, we were. Time passed slowly, and our eyelids grew heavy. The trick was to not fully enter what is known as rapid eye movement sleep, also known as our deep sleep state. This is where one would typically dream. Our goal was to have our minds break between that state and our consciousness in order to be, quote, between the two. This is where the shadows are seen. My consciousness still held its grip while the white noise helped center my mind onto the deeper state. I caught sounds of snoring from the woman to my left. Her consciousness slipped, and she must have fully entered the dream world. Marty and I still seemed to hold true to our consciousness. It wasn't until much later when the lights overhead flickered. What felt like small needles slithering up the sides of my legs soon jolted into my spine. The feeling made me fidget, however, I didn't move. Attempting to wiggle my toes, my body was completely frozen. And that's when I saw it. No, not a demon nor sapient of any kind. It was a shadow falling over me with curiosity. Both of us wanted to know more of the other. The best way to describe this would be to picture someone dropping food coloring in a glass of water. Using that image, the shadow I witnessed was the food coloring, and the room was its glass of water. No! A sudden cry spooked the shadow away from me, and back through the wall of its origin. My body tensed up before fully recovering from my sleeping bag. The woman and I woke up to find Vivian and others surrounding Marty, who had just had a seizure. Marty was not an epileptic, so our nurse called for an ambulance. When it arrived, I took to his side as the emergency medical technicians were able to resuscitate him. We were all relieved. They told us he still needed to go to the hospital since he had no history with epilepsy. We were not going to argue with their expertise. I decided to ride with Marty to the hospital while Vivian and the team went through the recordings and observation. Hey. Marty sat up during the ride. I pushed my hand down, guiding him to lay back in order to rest. He was very stubborn. He sat up again and motioned for me to come closer. I saw it, he whispered. I saw the shadow. I compared my encounter with his. Looking around for my cell phone to call Vivian, Marty was still painting what he saw. I figured we had seen the same thing, which was one possibility our team hypothesized. However, his encounter was not of food coloring and a glass of water. Instead, it seemed he saw a sapient creature crouching over him. I finally found my phone when Vivian called. I asked her to hold on for a moment while they unloaded Marty to a wheelchair. I followed him from behind, but paused when Vivian told me that prior to Marty's seizure, one of the cameras captured his entire body, slightly lifting from his sleeping bag. There had to be some explanation. Perhaps he was trying to lift himself out of paralysis, and the camera was playing a weird angle on us. When I told her of Marty's observation, Vivian told me to come back immediately. I was not going to leave Marty alone at the hospital, no matter where we were in our experiment. Before I continue on to what this all led up to, remember when I mentioned probability? Well, I might have left out the part where we had another team doing the exact same experiment over in Cambridge. What can I say? We wanted to be very thorough. After all, Vivian was a perfectionist. One of our colleagues from the Cambridge team, who we'll call Thomas, contacted our team once his team had completed their experiment. They claimed that only 2 people out of their 6 experienced sleep paralysis. Only one of those 2 had seen a sapient creature. Vivian ran their tape, and no movement had been noticed. No one on their end needed medical attention, thank God. When Thomas came to hear about Marty's misfortune, their team shut everything down. Not worth the risk. Thomas agreed we needed to uncover what had happened in more detail before continuing. Pull the other camera's footage of Marty, I instructed Vivian. After hanging up, I rushed to catch up with Marty being wheeled into a room, waiting for a doctor. Marty was unusually quiet, but then again, I'm sure he felt uneasy about having a seizure, especially since he's not had any history that would lead to one. I kept trying to convince myself that his episode had not been related to the experiment. Besides a few pounds of pressure, there was no record of anyone being affected between dream and consciousness. Well, not physically outside paralysis, anyways. I was very curious about the whole thing. From our Cambridge team, the hypothesis of the shadow sapient being the same came to light. Both descriptions were very identical. I'd been the only one that observed a different kind of shadow, mine being non-sapient. Don't worry, we are now at the final piece of this entire episode. Vivian called me again, and I escaped to the hallway, away from Marty. My intentions were to make him feel more comfortable. It was I who needed comfort. Vivian had pulled footage from the other cameras, and Marty's body did appear to have fully lifted slightly from his sleeping bag. She also claimed that he opened his mouth and began to scream "no" before having his seizure. Scratching my head, I told her that we already knew that. It's what jolted the other sleeper and I awake. "You don't understand," Vivian replied. She continued to explain that what they saw in the footage didn't make any sense. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Vivian further explained that they immediately rushed down the stairs when Marty had his seizure. It wasn't until moments later when the other woman and I awoke. "Nobody screamed," Vivian told me over the phone. "It was completely silent when Marty had his seizure." What are you saying?" I asked, trying to grasp her story. "There hadn't been any screaming." There had to be a mistake, I told myself. Maybe in that moment, everyone was so frightened that they didn't remember him crying out. I turned my attention back onto Marty inside the room. He was cracking his neck and studying his fingers. One may look upon him and compare his movements similar to that of a species adjusting inside a new shell. Or maybe he was just trying to recover from not only having a seizure, but any leftovers of paralysis. Regardless, it seemed that this case was far from over. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, you know what to do. Drop an elbow onto that like button. And drop a comment too if you feel so inclined. Guys, I gotta say, well, first and foremost, shout out to the author of this story, Reddit user Mr. Night Owl. I will leave a link down to their subreddit down below. The original post, however, for the story has been removed. So, it sounds like there's a part 2 coming, and if there is, I would love to narrate it, but I'll keep an eye out. But anyway, the crazy part of this is that I actually had sleep paralysis yesterday, a day before recording this audio. And I hadn't had sleep paralysis in a long time. And the thing is, you might be thinking, oh, you probably just found this story, that relates to sleep paralysis because you were interested. I planned to record this back in December. Like, I have a whole schedule made, and just the way it landed, I had sleep paralysis yesterday, and I'm recording this today. And I don't know. That kind of freaks me out, guys. Anyway, just thought I'd share that with you. Until next time, everybody, remember to stay safe out there. I'll be seeing you in the next video.